Welcome back to the Two Pointers podcast. I'm Trevor Everett. I don't even know what to do with my hands right now because this is literally March Madness. We are here to actually talk about a bracket. I'm here with my buddy Phil Dexter. We are going to get into it in just a second. If you are new here, if it's the first time, you're looking for bracket analysis and all that stuff, hopefully you hang out here for about an hour and 20 minutes. Have some fun with us. Don't forget that we are also presented by SeatGeek. If you are going to any of the tournament games, if it's your first purchase on SeatGeek, you get $20 off. Code 2pointers. You can also click the link at the very top of the description. That'll say download SeatGeek, and you'll take you right to the app to be able to spend that $20 on hopefully a March Madness purchase. I unfortunately won't be able to do that this year with it being in Greensboro right down the road for me. But first of all, I want to introduce Phil. Had him on a few weeks ago for the Tobacco Road Prospects draft stuff, and now it's actual college basketball talk, what I want you here for and what I want to have some fun with you. So first of all, thank you for coming back, and second of all, tell my listeners, if they didn't listen last time, where they can find you and what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, first of all, super excited for this bracket as well. I think we talked about it a little bit last night, but this is sort of like Christmas for all of us huge college basketball fans. So really excited to get into it with you. And I co-host the Everything College Basketball podcast. You can find us on Twitter at ECB Podcast 10. I also write at House of College Hoops. You can find us at houseenterprise.com. So yeah, just really excited to get into this with you, man.
All right, so we talked about last night on the Twitter space that Rutgers, by the way, for the listeners and the viewers, we are just going to roll right into this. If you are new here, you can go back and listen to last year's and see how I did with Josh last 2 years before. But we are literally going to go pick by pick. If we agree, we'll give the reasoning why, and we'll keep rolling because we want to. I think the format does work if you actually keep an eye on time. So we're probably 2 or 3, 4 minutes in. We're going to keep rolling as we go. So you'll hear some stuff. If you're wondering what your favorite team or why we skipped over them, we either probably agreed on it or they were probably playing a team that they absolutely should have lost to. So we'll talk about that. So I have 2 questions for you at the top just to kind of get the juices flowing, get us thinking a little bit before we actually start making predictions. The first one is, what is the toughest region? Who do you think, I guess, think of it this way. If the number 1 seed in their region, who is sweating the most because their region's the toughest?
I think it's got to be Kansas. I mean, the 8-9 matchup in Kansas's region is Arkansas, Illinois. I think either of those teams could really give them problems at their best. Either of those teams can beat anybody in the country, to be honest with you. Then you also have St. Mary's, UConn, Gonzaga, and Texas. I mean, I believe, according to Bart Torvik, he has 7 of his top 12 teams in this region, and Kansas is actually the lowest rated of the 7. So that's a tough break for them.
Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about it because they were kind of the team for me as we got closer to the end of the Elite Eight. Spoiler, I think by accident, but we'll talk about it. I would say, I think if you're just going, and I think that Bartovic stuff is good. I heard that yesterday. It's like 7 out of 12 is nuts, and they're the lowest rated one, which crazy to think. But I think the South has a run for their money. I'll agree with you that it's Kansas's West, which, by the way, we talked about yesterday also on the space, is like the draw for them not getting Kansas City. Like, that just sucks for them, and it is what it is. Like, we're not going to harp on it because it happened, and we can't change it. So I'm like, anyway, I know Kansas fans are happy. I think the South has something to play here. That's kind of my segue into talking about the South before we talk about the underseeded teams. But the South has Alabama. I think West Virginia is a really tough team. San Diego State, Charleston, Virginia, Furman, Creighton, NC State, Baylor, Missouri, and Arizona are all really good teams to me. So it's like those are all, if you're just picking, like, if each game has a team I'm worried about, then I think that's a tough bracket. I can't necessarily say the same for the West, at least in my personal opinion. Neither of Arkansas, Illinois scare me too far. St. Mary's did not end the season on a proper stretch that they would want to be on. TCU's dealing with some things. Grand Canyon's not a so it's like there's a couple like Northwestern. I'm not worried about, probably Boise State. So there's a couple in there in the West that kind of break the crack for me. But either way, I think it's both of them are very, very tough. I'll lead you with this before we start getting into it. What seed should have been a better seed? So what double digit? I'm trying to figure out the best way for the listeners to articulate this. What 10 or higher should have been closer to lower, I guess, or better seed?
I'd probably have to go with Charleston. I was a little surprised to see them as a 12 after they ended up pulling off the conference championship. I mean, it clearly shows us that they were not on the at-large radar. They absolutely had to win that conference tournament to
Yep.
make the NCAAs here, which is a little surprising. I mean, I think a lot of people had them maybe not in as an at-large, but at least in consideration. Maybe first four out, next four out. I seen Lenardi had them at one point, so that was a little surprising to me. I expected to see them more around a 10 or 11. I think.
Yeah, very quickly, and then we'll keep going. So I think the fact that UNC Asheville is a 15, and that'll be the literal last thing we talk about in the first round, so we need to get rolling here in just a second. But Montana State is not a 14 seed. I'm sorry. I know I haven't watched a ton of their conference tournaments this year, or conference games this year, but I've seen enough UNC Asheville to know that, especially according to some of the Ken Palm and stuff like that, Montana State should not have been the 14. Colgate probably shouldn't have been the 15 either, but I would say Colgate and UNC Asheville fighting for some of those 14s over Grand Canyon, maybe, who's had some injuries. We talked with a guy who, I guess, went to Grand Canyon yesterday. That was really fun to hear, some insight there. Kennesaw, I think, deserved 14, and then UC Santa Barbara, I think, did too. So, obviously, you're picking straws at that point, but I don't think Montana State and Grand Canyon. Honestly, if you just flipped UNC Asheville and Colgate for Montana State and Grand Canyon, I think it would have been a perfect bracket, minus Rutgers.
Yeah, real quick, I was very surprised to see Colgate on that 15 line versus the 14 line. I thought they were even a strong 14. 14, I would probably be picking them, or at least considering picking them over a 3 like maybe Kansas State had they gotten to the 14 line.
I'm not shocked if they beat Texas, though. I wouldn't be like, oh, my God, whoa, no way. Because we've seen enough of them this year, and I've talked to Coleman Crawley enough, who's the biggest Colgate supporter that isn't a student in the entire country. Shout out to Coleman for his journey this year. But, Colgate, best three-point shooting team in the country against one of the hottest teams in Texas. So, all right, let's do it. This is the moment we've been waiting for, ripping the Band-Aid off for the listeners. If you want to follow along on your phone or on your computer, we are going to read it like a book. We're going to go South, Midwest, East, and West, and we're going to kind of play around with it from there. We're going to literally pick every game, but we're going to pick all 64 first and then go into the second round. We'll keep up with what we have so we're not losing each other and be like, wait, who did you have there? I'll try to keep the ship on the water. So Alabama versus the play-in 16 would be Texas A&M Corpus Christi, and I believe, like you told me, I think that was the SMOU. That was Southeast Missouri, right? That was Southeast
Missouri State. Yep.
So obviously, some good credit there to both of those 16 seeds. I think the obvious answer, I do have Alabama beating them. But I know that you had, ECB, you guys had talked to the coach from Southeast Missouri State. So if you would like to spend a minute on that, you can, just giving him his proper fair credit. But I do have Alabama beating either of these teams.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, do just want to at least mention those two teams because they both obviously fought to get here. Brad Korn was kind enough to give us some time, the head coach of Southeast Missouri. But honestly, neither of them have much of a chance here, so I don't have much more to elaborate on either. Unfortunately, you run into Alabama and Brandon Miller, who is an absolute buzzsaw. I just don't think either team has much of a chance to overcome that.
So here's the beautiful part about this tournament. We're immediately going to go from an obvious 116 to go from that to, I think the 8-9s this year were ridiculously drawn. It's almost cynical how ridiculous these 8-9s are. So Maryland and West Virginia, where did you lean? And we'll talk about why. And if we agreed, we'll figure it out and we'll keep rolling.
I lean Maryland here. Jameer Young is kind of the difference in this one for me. If you have a star player you can really lean on in the tournament, I'm generally going to lean your way. And I feel like Maryland has the best player in this game. I also really like Dante Scott for Maryland, who's a guy who maybe flies under the radar a little bit more, but has had some big games this year. And when he gets going from 3, I mean, against Illinois, I think he went 6 for 8, 6 for 7, something like that. So, yeah, he's a guy who can really turn it on, and I like Maryland in this one.
Yeah, 19-14 in a really tough conference. West Virginia. This is not the Bob Huggins West Virginia team we're used to. Defensive stout, running up and down the court. For them to have a, quote, off-brand year and to still be a 9 seed in this tournament just shows you how good the strength of the Big 12 was. I went with just the star power. I say star power. I think Young's unbelievable for Maryland. I think it was so close, and obviously I think they also hold teams to 63.5 points a game, so that is a big difference maker there when West Virginia – I'm not saying their offense isn't good. It's just not – it's potent compared to their defense. Their defense this year hasn't been very good. So I went with Maryland in a very safe, formidable fashion, but – if either of these 8-9, honestly, if all 4 of these 8-9s are the opposite of what I pick, not going to surprise me. They'll probably all lose to the 1s, and we'll go, and we'll learn our lesson. So, San Diego State, Charleston. Did you want to go straight into that, or do you have any other Maryland, West Virginia thoughts?
No, just to piggyback a little bit off of what you said, even though I'm picking Maryland, I believe that over the last 2 years, the nine seeds have won like 70% of these matchups. So
I'm well aware of that stat,
again,
and I wasn't happy about it as I made my picks.
would not shock me at all, like you said, to see all of these games go the opposite of the way I pick them. They're just such a toss up.
Yeah, we'll get to how many of nines I had, but wasn't many. San Diego State, Charleston. You mentioned Charleston at the top. So here's my problem, and I'm going to lay this out for you. I've told you this before, and I mentioned it last night on the Spaces. There is a running joke on my show that I have, and it's not a joke. I actually believed it both years, but I picked San Diego State to make the Final Four the last 2 years. Was I 2 years too early? Well, after seeing their draw, I'm not. Spoiler, not happening. So I'm not even going to fall into the trap again. But I do think that the Charleston pick's going to be way too pretty. I think their offense is this is the best offense they've had in the 3 years that I've overpicked them. We'll talk about how far later. But I think this is going to be the hardest game in the first round to really understand from a stylistic standpoint because of how good Charleston is and how deep they are. I went with San Diego State, but that's probably the reason I went to bed at 2:30 last night. Or one of the reasons.
Yeah, and I would really love to pick Charleston in an upset here because I think Charleston, you mentioned that they're a great team. They can really score the ball. They actually have some pretty good depth for a mid-major squad, but San Diego State is just they're a wagon defensively. They're only giving up 63, just shy of 64 points a game, but they play nine guys who all average 20 plus minutes. Nobody plays 30 minutes. So they're really deep, but they can stay fresh and pressure you all game. You mentioned that their offense this year is better probably than it has been. Still don't really have a go-to guy, but I like them to kind of just choke the life out of Charleston in this one.
Yeah, their offense doesn't scare me in this game, even though Charleston, I just think it's a wash when it comes to both teams. Both teams are pretty close to each other defensively, which is kind of crazy to think. But San Diego State, how far they go later is offensively is going to be the problem child for me. I really, again, this one's people are going to pick Charleston as the pretty one, and I feel bad for them because at the end of the day, like you said, they're probably seated a little bit differently. They're probably the pick for a lot of people. Like I think if they drew the 11 in this bracket, they would have drawn Creighton. Okay, never mind there. If they had drawn Iowa State in the Midwest, I think that they probably, like if these were flipped, and the 11 was the Mississippi State versus Creighton Pitt, I think we're having a different conversation here. I think if they draw the 11 against Kentucky, we're having a different conversation. Or at that point, TCU especially. Like I could see them beating TCU if they were the 11. So, yeah, Charleston 12 feels a little disrespectful for the year that they had. It also shows you the gap in the Colonial and the Conference USA a little bit. We'll talk about FAU in 2 regions from now. But FAU with a 9, and I feel like both those teams had a really similar season. And both are conference champions, and they're seeded from a 9 to a 12. Now, I know the resumes are a little bit different there, and we'll talk about that when we get to FAU. So, your darling FAU. So Virginia Furman, who do you have in the Paladins versus the Cavaliers?
I don't want to steal your thunder here, and I think we might be on the same page with an upset here, but we're both big Furman guys, and
Yes.
I think the combination of your guy Jalen Slauson and then the guy I happen to like, Mike Bothwell, they average 34 points a game combined, and where they're going to have some issues, I think, are teams that are a little bit bigger than them, and Virginia doesn't have a ton of size, especially with Ben Vanderplas now out. So I think that Furman can really be competitive in this one. Now, Virginia obviously has some great, very experienced guard play. Furman's going to have to shoot the ball well from outside, but I think they're very capable of doing that, and I think the Dins are going to shock the nation.
Yeah, they're going to shock the nation. They're not going to shock any of us that have been watching college basketball at this level for a couple months. And I got a chance to see the Furman lose very, very mightily in a 30-point loss to NC State at home. However, that doesn't change my opinion on it. That was not the same Furman team, and I think it was the second week of December. I think I literally got those tickets because no one was there, right? It was like Christmas break, and like it was Furman, and people were like, we don't need to go to that game, which, yeah, no one showed up. But it was really fun, and I saw a lot of the things that could make them a really dangerous tournament team. They're 10th in the nation in effective field goal percentage, according to Bartorvik. So they make their shots, and they make them efficiently. Both teams turn the ball over very well. They're both top 40 in that. Furman also number 1 in the country in 2-point field goal percentage, so they are going to get a bucket if it's inside the 3-point line. They're going to find a way, and against Virginia, I find that very valuable. They're a top 30 team in offensive efficiency, Furman is. There's just so many things going their way that I think if they could just get out ahead against Virginia, because Virginia likes to just grab the ball, control the pace, say, this is our game, you're going to play this way. And if Furman can just beat them up front, find a way to get that lead early, I think they can hold on to it. They have scoring from, like you said, Bothwell and Slauson and some of the others. I just think they can keep that. They can keep the game under control, and I think that's like the total opposite way of beating Virginia normally, but I think this team is built to be able to do that. And even if they lose, it will be close. I think that'll be kind of my bookmark for this game. It'll be, well, I feel this way about it, but people are going to be like, well, why did you pick Furman? I gave you all the reasons why. And people are probably going to be surprised when it's close. So, long-winded answer, yes, I figured we both would have the Paladins here. But Virginia's offense isn't playing the best it's ever played under Tony Bennett, and I can't do that, even though Furman's defense is not exactly stout. So we'll figure out why that ends up the way it is, and I just don't know. Like, there's so many reasons I think Furman can win this game, but there's also so many reasons they can lose this game too. So it kind of scares me, and I just think they keep it close.
Yeah, and real quick, just to mention one of the reasons they can lose it is they do rely heavily on the 3-point shot. You mentioned they shoot the 2-point shot great, but they take 46% of their field goal attempts from behind the 3-point line. So if they do get cold, that's where this game could get away from them a little bit.
Yep. All right. Creighton, NC State. So this is not a fun, I to be clear, as a fan, I audibly gasped and screamed whenever we got the 11 without the play-in. So obviously I'm going to try to do this as an honest journalist, but one of the toughest teams in the country, top 6 in almost every national championship historic metric. Long story short, basically, if you're in Ken Pom top 44 in defense and offense, and you're basically a national title contender. Creighton falls under all of that. They went through that stretch without Kalkbrenner for 3 games, then they lost the 3 games after he came back. Long-winded to say, I do think Creighton is the better team, and I feel really bad picking it because I would love to see Baylor and NC State in the second round. I mean, we talk about the 3 best guard rotations in the country. That comes up all the time in these conversations. Oh, I mean, Josh is going to give me 5 minutes tonight with you guys just to talk about if Baylor and NC State are playing each other. I just got to figure out how I'm going to formulate that opinion, but I think Creighton does beat NC State. I don't think we see it, so.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, NC State,
Boo.
their path to victory is probably.
Dang, we were screwed. As soon as I saw the 6, I went, we're going to get this 11. I looked at my wife and I said, we're getting the 11 right here. And then we did. And I got excited. And then I went, settle down, excitement. We're playing Creighton.
Well, and I was going to say, of all the 6s you could have drawn, Creighton is probably the one you don't want to draw because you mentioned that stretch earlier in the season they had. If not for that stretch, they're probably, a 4 at worst, maybe. But yeah, I just think Creighton overall has too many weapons between Nemhard, Kaluma, Kalkbrenner, Baylor Shireman, didn't even mention him. So, they have a ton of dudes offensively. The path to NC State for victory in this one is getting Joyner and Terquavion Smith both going at the same time. It's felt like kind of this year it's been one or the other in each game. Once Jarkel really had that stretch later in ACC play, that was when Terquavion was kind of struggling. If they can have both of those guys going at once, I really think that, they can knock anybody in the country off. But I got to go Creighton here as well.
They're one of the best in the country at turning teams over, and so is Creighton. So it's literally going to be who makes less mistakes, and I think the turnover battle, which changes almost every basketball game. Whoever wins the turnover battle, I'd love to see someone pull that data for, the last 20 years in the tournament. It's whoever wins the turnover battle, obviously homework for somebody if they want to do that. Whoever finds that and sends that to me, I'll find a way to give you some 2-pointers merch, but, or SeatGeek code. But just the turnover battle is so important, and statistically, I'm sure that answer I just asked for was 80% or more. If you won the turnover battle, you probably won your tournament game in the last 20 years. And I think the winner of this game is whoever just makes less mistakes. I do think State can make less mistakes. They're one of the best in the country in the turnover ratio, but it's tough. I love it, but I hate it at the same time. And I think it will be I think they'll put up a fight. I don't know. They play together. I mean, Turk also made a really funny video. I texted you and Josh this. He said verbatim in their little Instagram hype video, he was like, my first Sweet Six, or my first tournament berth, or however he worded it. And I was like, does that imply he means he might have another one? But I was like, nah, he played last year. He didn't make it. I didn't overthink it. So anyway, Baylor and the Gauchos of UC Santa Barbara, also one of the coolest team logos in the entire country. Like just the little, like, whatever that thing is, a gaucho or a cat looking over a hat. I don't really understand it. It is really cool looking, but the Gauchos and the Bears, who do you have?
I think you probably know this from last night, just based on the spaces, but I do have Baylor here. We just mentioned it with NC State and the guard play, but Baylor has three of the best guards in the country between LJ Cryer, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget one of their names, but Keontae George, and then for whatever
Adam
reason,
Flagler.
Yeah, Adam Flagler. Thank you.
I don't know why I can remember his name that easily.
And then they also have guys that fly under the radar for them, though, like Jalen Bridges, who has led them in scoring a couple games. JTT's back. Obviously, Flo Thamba. So I think that Baylor, they disappointed to end the season, but they've had some stretches here where they've shown that they're a national title contender, and I don't want to write the Gauchos off. They play a very efficient offense. They have a number of guys who can score for them, but I think Baylor is just way too much.
Okay. I'm going to agree very quickly because I want to make sure we leave time for some of the Sweet 16 Elite 8 matchups that are going to be a little bit tougher. I agree Baylor is going to beat UC Santa Barbara. We'll talk about how far I think the Bears go in just a minute. Missouri, Utah State. It's basically just a matter of whichever team scores 140. So it's like the first team. We're going to set the Elam ending for this one. This is the only game in this region that gets to play the Elam ending because somebody will hit 140 eventually. Utah State, I have the Aggies getting hot at the right time. They're an unbelievable three-point shooting team. I did watch Missouri in the SEC tournament, and I felt like they were really tough defensively, like the way they play. They're almost like Tennessee in that stance. Obviously not the same rating defensively, but Missouri plays this really tough, physical, full-court press basketball, and it just seems like a mix of West Virginia and Tennessee. It just seems super fun. But I do think Utah State will shoot themselves into a victory, hopefully.
Took the words right out of my mouth. I think between Taylor Funk and Stephen Ashworth getting hot, Utah State just lights it up from deep. And it wouldn't shock me if Missouri beat them. Obviously, they're the higher rated seed. Demoy Hodge is an awesome player. Kobe Brown was in contention for SEC Player of the Year there for a while, but I like Utah State.
Yeah, you lose these games, you win these games like by the 3, and I think they'll probably win this one. I don't think they'll go much further. And then Arizona, Princeton, very quickly. I don't want to disrespect Princeton, but Yale was the best team in the Ivy League pretty consistently all year. Princeton beat them. It was a close game in the Ivy League tournament, but Princeton looked better. I mean, they beat them straight up. They had a couple of big plays down low at the end, but I have the Wildcats moving on.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, there's not too many teams that are going to match up with the front court of Ballo and Tabellis, and definitely not Princeton. So Wildcats all the way.
All right, and I just thought of this as we were doing this, and I think for the sake of listening to each region, I've normally done it where we literally move on to the Midwest and go from there. But I think for the sake of not remembering who we picked, even though I can look at it and be like, wait, but who did you pick? Because I think we just finish the South, we get our Final Four team, then we talk about the Final Four at the end, and we go on. So if you're fine with that, let's roll and go right back up to the top of the South. I think that's a lot more consumable. I'm thinking about it now. We both had Alabama and Maryland. See, the fact that I remembered that immediately instead of having to fumble over it should show you why I think this is better. Alabama, Maryland, we both had. Who do you have?
Alabama. I mean, I told you before we started this, I feel like I may be a little too chalk here, but I'm definitely not ready to go away from that. Alabama's the best team in the country. Could Maryland shoot themselves into a victory? Absolutely. But Brandon Miller, Javon Quinterly, Noah Clowney, just Bama has too much. They have too much for some of the better teams in the country, and I don't think Maryland's in that echelon.
All right. Very easily, I'll be quick here. I do think Alabama, sometimes the best player matters, and the way Brandon Miller's playing right now, I don't care what Jameer Young does. Alabama's going to beat Maryland or West Virginia, and they move on to the Sweet 16 for me. San Diego State, Furman. We both had that because we both scaredly didn't pick Charleston, and then we both picked Furman confidently. This is fun. This is kind of an internal, honestly, I'll word it like this. I worded it last night with the Mountain West. It's like picking my favorite child. So this is one of the few like picking my favorite job matchups in this bracket that I hate to talk about. Um, I'm going to go first, and I'm going to shock you. I have Furman moving on to the Sweet 16, and it's not because I love Furman. It's because I do think this is where San Diego State's offense catches up to them. Furman's an unbelievable offense. We've already talked about them plenty just a minute ago about why. But I also understand that all of the analytics and all of the Ken Pom really like San Diego State. They're 14th, in Ken Pom. They are 11th in Bartovik's power rating. I know. But again, Furman offensively, I think will be too much for them eventually. And I think if they're shooting the ball well, which I think is the difference maker, Furman wins another game. I think if they're shooting the ball well, they can beat that San Diego State defense.
This is kind of the ultimate battle of styles in the tournament. You have one team who's top 10 in the nation in offense and scoring, one team who's top 10 in the nation in defense and efficiency, but I am typically going to lean with the defensive team in that case. And I like San Diego State's depth here. I think they'll need somebody to really step up and have a big scoring game for them in this one to you're not going to completely shut Furman down. So they're going to have somebody step up. And I think like maybe Trammell is that guy for them in this game. And I like San Diego State.
Yeah, I figured I was going to be on an island with the Furman pick, but I kept looking at it last night, and I was like, I can't spend 65 minutes on this game, so I'm going to have to – sometimes they tell you, go with your gut, and this is a go with my gut moment because why would my gut be wrong 3 years in a row on San Diego State making it past the round of 32? This is a really bad point for me because it's just – they drew any other region, I probably make the same blind love pick for them into the, at least the Sweet 16, but – God, I feel bad. And they're probably going to – this is the year that as soon as I do it, they're going to do it, and they're going to make the Sweet 16 at least, and they're going to play Alabama, play them tough, and I'm going to be pissed. And I can see the game in my head right now already. So I probably should have changed this pick. But you know what? I saw the Paladins play this year. I really liked what I saw, even though they lost by 30. I get that. I'm going to go with Furman beating San Diego State. So, Creighton Baylor. We're going to keep rolling. Sweet 16 berth for one of these two teams. I think we both had Creighton and Baylor. So let's just be – I know, again, you said it felt a little chalky, right? It's like, 3-6, really? It's like, well, this 6 isn't really a 6, and we know that. So I went with Creighton. I do think they are a better physical team. I don't think Baylor can handle Kalkbrenner very easily. To be fair, I don't think anybody in this side of the bracket can handle Kalkbrenner that easily, which I think if he is playing very well, the rest of that team just has to be – at least decent offensively, and I think they can do it. They have one of the best starting lineups in the country. Baylor's depth, I talked about it with Josh on ECB last week. I don't love their depth, even though JTT, I called him Jonathan TT because it sounded funnier. But, I don't think Jonathan TT is getting back in enough time to really be able to be an integral part in their offense. He's not that anyway. He's just more of a defender for them anyway. But I do think Creighton's a better team, long-winded here, and I do think Creighton wins.
Yeah, I go Baylor here. You mentioned depth, and I feel like Creighton leans a little too heavily on like six guys. They really outside of six guys don't
Yep.
play a ton of minutes. They have, I think, go 7 or 8 deep, but those last two guys don't really play much.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go Baylor here again. Guard play wins in March, and Creighton actually has good guards, so I don't want to sell them short. But the trio of guards, somebody goes off for them. You mentioned Kalkbrenner. He is the best big man, definitely in this side of the region. But I think Flo Thamba can at least, use his length to give him some problems. It's not as bad of a matchup as like NC State, who doesn't really have any length down low with DJ Burns would be. So I go Baylor here.
Yeah, it would be really fun to see the Wolfpack and the Bears go at each other, like I said, but Creighton's the better full unit, I think, would be kind of where we go because obviously State's got some injuries and why I think that would be an interesting matchup. So, let's go with Utah State. We both, again, this is a little bit easier. I like that we're just having some discrepancies, at least in the round of 32, despite picking some of the same teams. So we both had Utah State beating Missouri in a shootout and then Arizona beating Princeton. So I have Arizona making the Sweet 16 first time since, obviously, Coach Miller has left them. So I think Arizona beats Utah State. I think their offense is good enough. I think Utah State will scare them because of if they're hot for at least one game, why can't they be hot again, right? It's the same answer for Missouri. I think Missouri would probably be the better matchup and keep that game even closer, but I think Arizona can beat Utah State.
Yeah, I think Arizona handles them, but you mentioned it. I do think Utah State gives them a scare here. Arizona's rated just 41st in adjusted defensive efficiency per Ken Palm. So I think a team that can really get hot from three, like Utah State's the kind of team that can, score in the 80s against them and really push Arizona's offense. But Arizona has probably six or seven weapons, whereas Utah has maybe two or three. And I think they're just able to overpower them, basically.
This is just eye test, but what scared me is against UCLA, like a few minutes into the second half, Tubelis looked almost exhausted. Like he looked like he was walking back up the court multiple times. And I wasn't even the one that really pointed it out. I saw it on Twitter. Like I stayed up late. Like I said to I think one of you guys, I was like, well, you know, it was fun to watch this game at 1, knowing it's actually 2. But it was like, I got to notice things. If I'm going to stay up to late, I'm going to try to get something out of this game and understand it a little bit better. And Arizona was the better team in the end. And obviously we see how that favored them and UCLA for the seeding purposes. So they looked exhausted, and I hope that they enjoy this time off between now and I believe they've got the Thursday. I hope ESPN's updated on the computer now. They have the 4:00 game on Thursday, so it's not like they even get an extra day or an extra, a couple hours of rest there. But I think they'll be fine against Princeton, and then they'll have that Utah State game as a potential game on the 19th. So, all right, let's keep rolling. We have the Sweet 16 of Alabama, and you have San Diego State. I have Alabama Furman. I'll make this easy. I don't care who it is. Alabama's moving on because ultimately Brandon Miller is going to beat San Diego State's defense probably by himself at this point. But no, they are one of the most complete teams on this side of the bracket and in the country. And I think Alabama beats any combination of either Furman or San Diego State.
Yeah, I don't have much to expand on beyond that, other than Brandon Miller, Alabama's size really gives San Diego State some problems. San Diego State's a much smaller team. I think their biggest starter's like 6'8". So Bediako and Clowney would just give them a ton of problems down low, I think. And then obviously Brandon Miller's the man. So
one thing to think about
on.
From your perspective, since you have San Diego State and I don't, one thing I want to think about is in that SEC championship game, I know that Texas A&M at one point it wasn't close, but Brandon Miller and Noah Clowney in the first half had 3 fouls. Well, they went to half with 3 fouls, I think, or just out of the second half with 3 fouls. So if there's any team that's going to give them foul trouble problem, it's San Diego State. Like if they're going to get them into foul trouble, that game could end up upside down for Alabama very quickly. So I think I'm going to keep an eye on that. I know that's 2 freshmen, inexperienced players that are capable of fouling and using their hands too much and some of those post ups. So you got to be really careful if you're an Alabama team that can get into foul trouble. But they are deep enough that they know what to do in those spots. But this is the tournament. This is not the SEC tournament against a Texas A&M offense that I'm not a fan of. So this is a big difference. This is somebody like San Diego State or Furman or Arizona, or like you got to be really careful, and you can't shoot yourself in the. You can't do that to yourself in the tournament. I'm gonna move on. Creighton, Arizona. I believe you have Baylor, Arizona. So who would you like to go with here?
Well, last night in the spaces, I backed myself into a corner a little bit with taking
You did.
taking Baylor to the Final Four somehow, and I had a little bit of time to reflect on that, and I think I'm going to go Arizona here. I just think Arizona's size in this matchup would be.
Did you forget they were at the bottom? Did you just forget Arizona was there?
I didn't forget, but I don't know. Somebody just got me raving about Baylor's guard play last night, and I think I said, I think they're a national title contender, and one thing led to another.
I love it.
I like Arizona on this one.
Baylor's definitely, because of the guards, they're kind of like the cute girl across the bar that you're like looking at for 4 hours. You're like, you can make the national championship. No, I have the Arizona Wildcats. I have them be playing Creighton, and I have them moving on to play Alabama. I do think that Arizona is the better team ultimately. I do think Creighton is, again, underseeded for their talent. I do have Arizona beating them and playing Alabama in the Elite Eight. So I believe we have the same Elite Eight. Alabama, Arizona, which is so funny how this works out. People are like, you'll never get a perfect bracket because it's a 1 in bajillion chance. And then it feels like we always end up with the same teams in the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight. It's like, other than St. Peter's last year, it was like, oh, well, yeah, okay, all those seeds should have ended up where they were. So we ultimately still landed on the 1 and the 2 playing each other. So basically, I love the tournament. Long story short, all these teams play each other in the middle, and then all of a sudden it doesn't matter. It's just the teams at the top and the bottom of the region. So anyway, Alabama, Arizona, who is heading to Houston in April?
I think this is where we may differ, but I'm going to go Arizona here. I like the way that Arizona just shoots the ball better. They're third in the country in effective field goal percentage, 14th in the country in 3-point percentage, top 10 2-point percentage, but they share the ball. That's the one thing that jumped out at me when I was digging at the stats in KenPom. They're fourth in the nation in assisted field goals. So I really think they're going to just be able to move the ball around, not have to rely on necessarily one guy like Alabama might have to with Brandon Miller. And I think being able to spread the love between 5, 6 guys, Arizona handles business and heads to the Final Four.
It's a battle of the A teams. What A team comes out on top here? Both of them are very potent offensively. I think Arizona's front court is going to be the difference. I think Arizona's front court has won them a lot of games this year, and I think if you're going to be able to go up against another front court like Alabama with Clowney and Miller and some of those guys, I think this is where Arizona gets the edge. I think it's the front court, and I think it makes a difference. They're also Arizona's one of the most efficient teams offensively in their top 36 team in field goal defense. So I think Arizona would be able to give them a problem. I think Alabama's guards are better than Arizona's guards, which is hard to say, but I think that is why I would have the Wildcats moving on. So our Final Four is set in the South. We will move on to the Midwest. All right, in the Midwest, we have the Houston Cougars trying to get to their home town, I would say arena, but no way they're playing a Final Four in their home arena in Houston, but they're playing in NRG this year. So Houston, Northern Kentucky, who do you have in this one? And then is this the Sweet 16, or sorry, is this the 16 seed that has the most potential to upset someone? I know you have your Howard, Texas Southern, FDU, AMCC, and all those guys.
Probably the most likely just because of Sasser's injury, but I think Sasser's injury or not, I take Houston in this one. Houston kind of got a rough break. I think they would have rather played Friday, Sunday than Thursday, Saturday, just again from the Sasser injury standpoint. So that's a little rough break for him, but I like Houston.
Yeah, so do I. I will say, though, I've been bookmarking this conversation for a couple hours now, and it's like, this Northern Kentucky team slows the game down. Like, that is the reason that they were able to win the Horizon tournament. Obviously, some ridiculous offenses in that tournament. They are like, they play right into Houston's hands and vice versa. Those two teams are fine with grinding it out, like 22-point, 28-point first halves. Like, I am okay with that if I'm Northern Kentucky, but they can make shots, and Houston right now struggling a little bit. That would scare me. Don't be shocked if this one's a little bit closer than it should be. So, yeah, I have the Houston Cougars. Iowa, Auburn. I talked about the 8-9 seed with Maryland, West Virginia. These are all ridiculous 8-9s, the entire bracket. So, who do you have in a battle of – I can't even come up with a funny pun. Who do you have in 8-9 Iowa, Auburn?
Well, I think originally I had Iowa here. I really was factoring the Chris Murray thing in, and just again having the best player on the floor, a guy who can go off for 25, 30 points a game, I think is very valuable. But then somebody in the spaces last night mentioned, this game being in Birmingham, which I didn't really consider, and Auburn will have a huge home court advantage. I kind of see this similarly to when South Carolina got put in Greenville, I think back 2016, 2017, and we're able to make a run out of that region. So I like Auburn here.
Yeah, I thought about it. I didn't take it into consideration because I also watched Iowa live play Michigan State and had, they were like 8 for 12 down the stretch against Michigan State, went into overtime. I know people aren't a fan of McCaffrey, but I think he's a fine coach enough to be able to at least play against Bruce Pearl here and figure some stuff out. Maybe scheme him a little bit with some of the offensive stuff they do with the three at Iowa. So I would very begrudgingly pick 8-9. But again, I'm 2 8s in a row, and I know the nines favor in the last 25 years. I know the nines favor that matchup. So take my picks with a grain of salt. I think Iowa can just at least out offense Auburn. All right, Miami Drake. We can keep on flying. Miami Drake is probably the most tantalizing 5-12 other than San Diego State Charleston. Who do you have? Hurricanes versus the Bulldogs.
This is where I have my 5-12 matchup or 5-12 upset, excuse me. I feel like it's almost obligated. You got to do one every year. And I like Drake here. Miami, it
Yes.
sort of depends if Omer is back, and I don't even want to say 100% because there's no way he's 100% after the way he rolled that ankle, but if he's at least mobile and effective, then that maybe changes this game for me. But if not, they don't have much size to take advantage down low. And Tucker DeVries is, one of the best 3-point shooters, one of the best scorers in the country. So I go Drake.
Yeah, these teams are a lot closer than I think people realize. And they're like, wait, what do you mean? So I really, again, I told you I tried to caveat or preface with I use Bartorvik a lot more than I should probably, but it does give you a really good landscape of the season now. Bartorvik early on doesn't help me. Now they do. So adjusted offensive efficiency, of course, Miami is top 11 in the country, so I think that's a big difference there. But Drake is no slouch offensively. They're also 42nd in the country in adjusted defensive efficiency, so they are a lot better defensive team than they are shown. Miami does not defend as well as I think people realize, so I think Drake's going to have an advantage there. Drake's the better rebounding team. They're the third best rebounding percentage team in the country. Overall, Drake can turn the ball over well. They can shoot the three really well. They have a good player on the floor. Not that Miami doesn't. They have Tucker DeVries. My only fear is if, like you said, Amir is playing well and he's there, I don't like that Drake doesn't have a reliable big man. They play a lot of guards. They play a lot of small forwards. And I think Drake can lose that because of that battle with Wong and Pack and some other guys there and Miller for Miami. So I think this is close, but I do have, by the way, they are only ranked in Bartorvik's power ranking average 38 and 46, Drake being 46. So they're a lot closer than I think people understand. At least a lot of the statistics show me that. And I believe in them, and I've seen them a lot this year beat a lot of capable teams, and I think Miami isn't playing. I mean, I know they lost to Duke in the final there, and I know they made the finals, but Miami was really good like maybe February was like kind of where I saw them like just kicking people's butt, and like it's the middle of March and I don't feel the same about them as I did regardless of injuries. So I do think Drake beats Miami, but I wouldn't be shocked if Miami pulled it off.
Totally agree with that last point real quick. Miami peaked in like that February 6th victory against Duke where they beat them by like 23 or whatever it was.
It
Not
felt
that
like
they
more
were
than
terrible
that.
down the stretch, but that was their best point of the season.
Yeah, it felt like way more than I checked the thing and I saw a 5 and an 8 and I'm like, God, this seems like should be 30 something, but yeah, whatever it was. The other polarizing high seed is right below them, and that is kind of the unfortunate part about this side of the bracket. Kent State is your 13 playing Indiana, the 4, who, if you had told me at the beginning of the season Indiana was a 4 seed, I would have been like, you're lying. So I would have been like, okay, cool. But they had a really good year. Obviously, Trace Jackson Davis is an unbelievable player. Probably will finish second in the player of the year in the country. But I think Sincere Carry's legit. I think Kent State's going to beat them. I don't have this long drawn out answer for why, but I think Kent State beats them. I do think their defense. They have one of the best guards in the country. He's second in the nation in steals. His name is eluding me now. I think they can beat them from the guard standpoint, and then at that point, if Trace Jackson Davis has a 28-point triple-double, then they're just going to have to live with that. I think Kent State's going to win.
Got to disagree with you here. I'm going Indiana. I just think between TJD and then honestly, it's more about Jalen Hood-Schifino for me and the way he plays. If he has a bad game, he could definitely get them into some trouble here. And Kent State's a great team. I do not want to sell Kent State short. They also maybe would have been one of the teams I considered a little bit underseeded for the type of season they had to be a 13 in the MAC, where Toledo is also very, very good. Kind of shocking to me, but it just worries me. Usually the recipe for being a mid-major to pull off this upset is shooting from 3-point, land great. And they're not a great 3-point shooting team, only shoot 33% on the year, 215th in the country. So that worries me a little bit, but you mentioned it. Sincere Carry is an absolute stud.
Is Indiana still without Johnson?
Johnson will not be back
I didn't think
far as I know.
think so. Okay.
And that I do think plays into it because Hood-Schifino has to take, so much of the ball handling duties, and I don't think he's a great facilitator necessarily. So, like you said, I do think they're capable of pulling the upset, Kent State, but I like Indiana.
And it's not fun to sit here and watch a 12. I mean, it's fun. Don't get me wrong. It's not fun for me knowing that it's harder for a 12 and a 13 to be playing each other in the round of 32. But I think one of those two teams can make the Sweet 16. It's just a matter of which one. So I think Drake will be able to figure that out against Miami, and I think Kent State will be able to figure it out against Indiana. Iowa State versus the winner of Mississippi State and Pitt and Dayton. Who do you have?
See, I'm a little torn in the way to pick this one because it depends really for me who wins in Dayton.
This is why I hate this. This is why I hate this too. I'm with you.
I think if Mississippi State gets past Pitt, then they could very easily win a rock fight, and I'd probably pick them to win a rock fight against Iowa State. Just Iowa State is so hot and cold offensively. I would pick Mississippi State in that matchup, but I would probably pick Iowa State over Pitt just because I don't really. Pitt relies on such tough shot making. They don't get a lot of open looks. So when they're cold, and I think Iowa State's suffocating defense could really, dominate that game. So I'm gonna say Mississippi State goes on because that's who I think wins the matchup in Dayton. But I'll leave myself a little room.
That's the beautiful part about this is you can say that now, and I appreciate. Honestly, you said everything I would have said, so I'm not going to elaborate any further. But you mentioned shot making as a skill. We talked about it with Bryce Sensabaugh, somebody you're higher on, I think, than consensus right now, which is totally fine. The point is as a player, it's a skill. As a team, it's a weakness. So, and that's everything you said. I agree with Pitt, Mississippi State. I do have Iowa State winning either way. Even though I do think Mississippi State would be close. For this podcast's sake, you have to make the pick now. But for your bracket, you can literally watch that Dayton game and then go in and figure out exactly at that point who you want, and you'll have all the stats there to show it, and it'll be kind of fun. So I do like the thought process there. Iowa State moves on. Xavier and Kennesaw State. I'm going to throw out something that's very, very interesting. Kennesaw State is the second luckiest team in the country, according to Ken Palm. Why I am telling you they're the second? Because the other luckiest team is in this tournament as well. We will get to them later. So Kennesaw State is the second luckiest team. Why that matters? I don't think Xavier's playing their best ball. They're 7-8 in their last however many that is. I don't have it written down. Quick math. Xavier is going to get a tough game here out of Kennesaw State, but I do have Xavier moving on.
Yeah, I like Xavier in this one too, even with the injuries. Just I think they still have a lot more weapons. You mentioned the luck though, real quick. I think that luck is actually a little bit of a skill. So much of that is, how close games are decided.
I love
And
it.
and we see overall with teams like Kansas that, over the course of even the long term, they win close games. So I hate that they call that a luck rating the way they calculate it because a lot of it is based on winning close games.
Well, funny you say that. We'll talk about if it is a skill when you hear who the number one. You probably know who the number one team in luck is, but if not, we'll get to them in a little while. And I do think it is a skill also. Texas A&M, Penn State, the most tantalizing 7-10. I don't have it as a tantalizing. Like I don't have this bunch of drawn out thoughts there. I think the Nittany Lions, regardless of the Penn State or regardless of the Purdue loss, unfortunately on Sunday, I do think they played them really well. They know how to press, and I think they are the better team than Texas A&M. I've been a Texas A&M. You can call me a hater all year. I do think that they're underseeded. I think that was disrespectful to put the second best team in the SEC, who made the conference championship game, as a 7. But I think Penn State is the better team right now, and I think they're going to beat the Aggies.
I agree. I hate to keep bringing up 3-point shooting, but it's just such a big factor in today's game. And Penn State shoots a ton of them, and they make a ton of them at a very high rate. They take care of the ball. Penn State's offense is just super efficient overall. And then a guy like Jalen Pickett, triple double threat every night. You mentioned, I think Texas A&M got kind of screwed here. Underseeded, and then with an awful matchup in their game. So I go Penn State.
Yeah, we'll talk about Penn State's implications on the next game after we pick between Texas and Colgate, two teams that are playing some of their best basketball right now. Texas, obviously, Big 12 champs. Colgate, best 3-point shooting team in the country, so they obviously are going to be competitive in any game they play in. Tucker Richardson's an unbelievable talent. I have Texas, but again, we talked about it at the top, so I won't elaborate. I think Colgate got screwed in this seeding.
Yeah, that's really all I was going to say too. Is had Colgate gotten a 14, I might be willing to consider them a little bit more against a team like Kansas State, but against a team like Texas, I think it's a bad matchup, and Texas
In their
is
same
playing
bracket,
so good right now.
if they play Xavier, I'm picking. If Kennesaw State's the 15 and Colgate's the 14, I'm picking Colgate against Xavier.
Yeah,
I'm not even thinking twice about it.
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm not thinking twice about it, but I'm definitely considering it.
I'm just trying to draw up I'm trying to get the Xavier fans juices flowing. Don't hit the dislike button though, please. So we have Texas moving on against Colgate. It's hard to say that won't at least be a fun game. I do think Texas is that good though. Unfortunately for Colgate, but Houston, Iowa. I think you have Houston, Auburn. We're going back up to the round of 32 now for those listening and watching on YouTube.
Yes, I have Houston, Auburn. And again, a huge factor for me is how healthy Marcus Sasser is by the time this game is played. But I still like Houston. I think Auburn, the story for them is kind of good Wendell Green or bad Wendell Green. When he's great, he is great, but he is very turnover prone. His shot selection can be pretty questionable at times. So I like Houston in this one, despite the home court advantage for Auburn, home court advantage for Auburn. I'm sorry, but I think Houston got kind of screwed in that regard. Auburn should not have been put in this
No,
region.
no. Alabama also got a draw for Birmingham as well, if you didn't know. So, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, it's just, it happens in some of these places, and obviously these top seeds deserve some of that, but it is what it is. Yeah, Auburn fans, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening somewhere else and you're coming over to YouTube to figure out what Phil's Twitter is, it's right here on the screen, and you can attack him and not me, even though I don't like your team either. I didn't pick him the first round. I'm just trying to give them a landing zone for where to draw the Auburn hate. Houston.
I'll take it.
I also have Houston beating Iowa. I think that's the only team on this side of the bracket that can scare Houston, even with the injury. I don't want to let the injury cloud anything. I think he's probably fine. The probable designation, I think, is coach jargon. I told you that yesterday. But I also think that he's probably fine because he went out with an ankle injury that looked arguably worse than the groin injury, even though that was routine play for him to just like almost tear his groin. The fact that he didn't tear his groin is kind of a miracle. But he went down with an ankle injury against East Carolina, the game I was at, and he came back like 9 non-game minutes later, like 9 real minutes later, and he looked unbelievable. So ankles scare me more than groins sometimes. I guess it depends for small guards, but neither injury is very fun. I have Houston beating Iowa, but I think Iowa can keep it close with 3-point shooting. So I have Houston in the Sweet 16. Drake and Kent State for me. You have Drake and Indiana. So I have the pickings between the high seeds. You have obviously a digit seed there with Indiana, a low digit seed. So who do you have?
Yeah, I'm not going to get too much into the detail. We talked about kind of all the star players here. I just think you mentioned it. Drake doesn't have a lot of front court depth. Indiana has maybe the best front court player in the country, if not, top 5 for sure. So I like Indiana in this one.
This is why this is beautiful. I have nothing to worry about with front court depth when it's Drake and Kent State. It's a bunch of really skilled positional guards and forwards. So I have Drake making the Sweet 16. I've been on Drake all year. I never bought into the Bradley hype. I thought Drake was the best team in their conference all year. They have obviously an unbelievable tournament, fall in love with type player, that type of guy with Tucker DeVries. And I just think this is his proving ground. Also, I gave him a shout out in the draft chat I did on Friday with players that have the most to prove in the tournament, just as like a mid-major sleeper. I think he's got the most potential of mid-major player to have like a run that really flips his draft stock around and up towards the top of the second. And Tucker DeVries, I think, can beat Kent State there by himself. So I think Drake moves on to play Houston. Not a favorable draw for them. All right, where are we at? Iowa State. I believe you had. Did you have Iowa State ultimately moving on? I guess it was. You said against Pitt it was yes. Against Mississippi State it was no.
Yeah, I ultimately said I was going to say that I think Mississippi State's winning in Dayton, so I think Mississippi State moves on there. So I have Mississippi State and Xavier.
Okay. So I have Iowa State and Xavier, and I told you I felt a little chalky sometimes. This is a place where I know 6s and 3s don't always work out that way. I do think Iowa State, I know that their offense is really inconsistent, but I think against Xavier, whose offense is really good, I think Iowa State's defense is the difference there. Even though it isn't like top 15 in the country, anything crazy like that, I just think that would be two very similar style teams when they're both hot, and I think Iowa State would be Xavier.
And see, sort of for your same thinking, I'm picking Xavier over Mississippi State, but I just think Mississippi State, as good as they are defensively, they are that offensively challenged. And Xavier's so good offensively that even if Mississippi State's able to slow them down, they still have to find a way to score the ball. And so I take Xavier in that one.
You love him or hate him, I'm also picking against Sean Miller, and obviously one of the best coaches in the country. So that does play into my decision a little bit, whether it's Iowa State or Mississippi State. I think Iowa State's the best team in that cluster. I know that sounds crazy at being a 6. They've also played some ridiculous competition this year. In their conference, I believe they ended up finishing 9-9 in their conference. So I think Iowa State's better than their record shows. And I think we saw that they beat Baylor in the tournament. So, all right, Penn State, Texas. I think we both ultimately fell into the same 10-2 trap that I think the entire country is probably going to fall into with the Texas A&M. Texas would be really fun in the second round. I ultimately have the Longhorns playing the best ball right now. Some of the best rotations. Serge Rice can lock up about anybody on that Penn State team pretty easily, and also have himself a good couple of weeks here. So I do think Texas moves on.
Yeah, not only is Serge a great defender, but he can also knock down some threes, has maybe the best pump fake in the nation. He gets me with that thing watching every time.
The camera
So
guy falls for it more than anybody. Like, it's always funny because he'll like go up, he'll like follow it up. It's like, it's great. I love it.
but I also like Texas in this one to move on. Just a little bit too much for Penn State. Hopefully Timmy Allen's fully healthy. I think that'll also make a huge difference. If he's not, then Penn State, obviously, as we mentioned in the first round, can get hot from three.
Yeah, I think Penn State will have a really fun matchup there. I think I would have more fun watching Penn State Texas than I would have Texas A&M Texas. So I would want Penn State to be in that position, but I think Texas is better right now. So yeah, this is where it gets weird, which is why I wanted to stay in the same region as we talk. So I have Houston and Drake in the Sweet 16, and you have Lord, and then you have Houston and Indiana. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Do the Hoosiers pull it off?
No.
Oh, dang it.
Houston at least makes it to the Elite Eight here.
Like they did last year with a Sasser injury. Like, I get it. I'm here.
Yeah, Houston has been one of the better teams in the country all year. And if Indiana had Xavier Johnson, who we talked about a little while ago, this might be a different story. But ultimately, I just don't think Indiana has enough consistent scoring threats that they can rely on. They're like a wing away from being an elite team, but they just don't have that wing right now. So I go Houston.
Yeah, if this was like a, pre-trade deadline in the NBA conversation, and that was like a parallel for, the pick for Indiana, it's like, oh, Indiana's going to go out and get this guy at the trade deadline. It's like, this is college basketball. This is the team they have. It sucks. I agree with you, though. Does I guess the thought process around some of these storylines, you have to talk out loud. Memphis obviously pretty much dismantled Houston in the American Championship. Do any of these teams, like obviously Memphis could beat them again, we know that, right? But do any of these teams scare, like who has the most potential to beat Houston in this region here before the Sweet 16? Or before the Elite Eight, excuse me.
I might go Auburn. Just again, that I know Alabama's in that region, and so it's not. I don't think there's going to be 15,000 Auburn fans there, but I do think there's going to be a solid, probably 10, 12,000. Wendell Green could get going, and Bruce Pearl's a great coach. They play pretty good defensive basketball. So if that got into a rock fight, Wendell Green makes a couple of big shots for them. I could see that happening, but honestly, I don't see anybody really, really threatening them before at least that Indiana game. Indiana's definitely a threat because TJD is a threat to put up 30 and 15 on anybody. Jalen Hood-Schifino, we've seen have some huge, not necessarily games. He tends to have like a big half and kind of cool off for another half. But if he gets going for a big first or second half, they could definitely be a threat.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything there. I think Iowa, just because of the shooting, would be really interesting, which is scary because not that Drake or Kent State can't do it. Actually, Kent State played Houston earlier this year. I'm now realizing. I'm remembering that now. Kent State played Houston, and they only won by 5. Houston did in like a 44-49 game. So, and Kent State's offense is way better than 44-49. So, I don't know, man. Kent State makes the Sweet 16. That would be really, really cool. I'm not going to lie, to see that rematch.
That would be a very fun rematch.
Now that I think about it, the committee did that on purpose. So, anyway. All right, so Houston, I agree. I have Houston beating Drake. I'm not going to talk about it more. I think Drake is meets their match there. But if it's Kent State, I just gave you a storyline to keep an eye on. I do think Kent State would be really funny to watch them play Houston a second time. So, I do have Houston making the Elite Eight also. Iowa State, Texas, and you had Xavier in Texas.
If Xavier had Zach Freemantle right now, I would probably pick them and maybe even pick them to go to the Final Four. But without him, I just think they're a little too weak on the bench. So I'm going to go Texas here.
As am I. I have them beating Iowa State to play Houston in the Elite Eight. Houston and Texas. Again, we ended up all those fun matchups and all those upsets and all those this and this and that. And the tournament's so beautiful. You end up with a 1 and a 2 seed in the Elite Eight. Who do you have coming out of the region and heading not far down the road for either team, quite frankly, Austin to Texas or Austin to Houston, and then Houston would be staying home. So who do you have playing in the Final Four?
This is a really tough pick for me, but Ultimately, I think I lean Texas here, and just for the fact that they're playing better basketball down the stretch than Houston is. Houston has struggled a little bit, not even really factoring in that Memphis loss, but even in some of their wins over teams that they should have been dominating, they kind of, played with their food a little bit. And I think the backcourt, Marcus Carr, Tyrese Hunter, Serge Jabari Rice, and then, I think their front court's a little bit underrated. We mentioned Timmy Allen, technically kind of a front court, more wing guy, but Dylan Disu's been really good defensively on the boards as well. So I like Texas in this one.
As do I. I think Texas moves on. You said everything I was probably going to say, and for the sake of each of these almost taking 30 minutes, keeping it not to 2 hours, keeping it to an hour and a half, I'm going to try to get through Houston here. I do think that Texas does make the Final Four. So we both currently have an agreement in Arizona and Texas. This is really, really fun.
Promise this was not planned.
No, but it's okay. How we got there is the journey that we're really looking for. So, all right, to what we think both, unfortunately, is the weakest region, honestly. And Purdue getting the 1 seed after winning the Big Ten tournament. Purdue's going to play the winner of Texas Southern and FDU. Purdue wins.
Yeah, no way Purdue goes down here. When you have a 7-4 guy, your advantage against the mid majors is usually pretty big.
Yeah, no pun intended. Memphis FAU. This is fun for you because this is your darling team that probably should have been a 7 or an 8 seed. I fully believe that, and I think this is a ridiculously hard draw for them against the American champion in Memphis. I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off, and you're going to tell me why I picked FAU. I have Florida Atlantic winning a literal close game, like could come down to any final play, honestly, and I think FAU beats Memphis.
Yeah, I obviously, as you mentioned, FAU is sort of my darling, but they're a really efficient offensive team. Effective field goal percentage 19th in the country, but super efficient defensively as well. But I tend to lean towards teams, and this is why I had San Diego State going far as well, that distribute their minutes among a ton of guys. When you don't have to have 5-6 guys play 70% of your minutes, that's huge. And they don't have anybody who plays more than 61% of the minutes for them. They go 9 deep. Their scoring goes 5 deep. So I love FAU's depth. And I think that matters in a tournament setting as well. When you have to play these, short spans between games, I think it helps. And I like FAU.
What does Memphis have to do to get the win other than Kendrick Davis dropping 25?
I think it's Kendrick Davis dropping 25, to be honest.
Okay, that's fair.
I'm not a Memphis fan, to be honest with you. Like, I have to be totally upfront about that. As big of an FAU fan as I am, I'm not a Memphis fan. When I watch them, even when they win, it's ugly, which sometimes can be a good thing. But for them, I think it's a sign that they're not super well coached. Their offense looks broken a lot of the time.
Yeah, Penny's not a good coach. Start the bandwagon. Here we go. I'm with you. No, I agree. So Duke and Oral Roberts, they want social media to fall apart with this one, the committee does. 5-12, and I'm going to just put my statement out there on who I have winning and why, and kind of the implication of it. I got to watch this Duke team a ton this year. I just figure out like where they were in different sections, right? I got to see them against NC State. And NC State came out and completely dismantled them. That was the best 5 minutes out of a half I had ever seen, second half I had ever seen of a team in person. Duke looked completely disheveled. Shire looked overcoached multiple times or outcoached. But I think the winner of this game makes the Elite Eight. Quite simply put, I think Oral Roberts can beat Tennessee. I think they can beat Purdue. I think they can beat Louisiana if Louisiana beats Tennessee. I think they can beat if somehow Memphis or FAU beat Purdue. I think the winner of this game makes the Elite Eight, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I do think Duke has really good defensive guard play. You mentioned not playing very deep. Unfortunately, Duke is not a deep team, I think, at least far down into their bench that I rely on. Your Joe Youngs, your Grandisons of the world. But I do think Duke is going to be able to stifle the Oral Roberts backcourt a little bit.
Yeah, I'll be quick here because you pretty much said everything I would have said in this case. But I think Oral Roberts, if they were to get past Duke, matches up really well against Purdue just because Vanover is not going to be, overmatched necessarily against Edey, especially height-wise anyway.
Stretch him out too. Vanover can
That's
shoot.
what I was just about to say is he can drag him to the outside as well. So I totally agree with you. I think that's a great matchup, but I like Duke in this one as well. I've seen Duke probably more than any team I've seen in the country this year. Love their defensive guard plays. You already said the 3-point shooting needs to be better though. If they get cold from 3-point, it could be trouble.
Yeah, and they play together. They play as every. Yeah, I got to talk to a couple of those guys after the Louisville game, and just everything. All three of them echoed they're playing together right now, and obviously they went on to win an ACC tournament. So that Duke team is playing the best they can play right now for a 5, and obviously we've seen that happen before. 5 seeds don't win national championships that often, but obviously this team can compete really hard. So I'll be quick on Tennessee, Louisiana. If this was Marshall, this was the easy pick. Marshall's going to beat Tennessee, but unfortunately it is Louisiana. That's not a disrespect to them. This is the other statement or caveat I have with the 413 is everyone's going to pick Louisiana in this game, which means it's not going to happen, and I'm just going to go safe and hopefully that be a difference maker for me in some bracket challenges. And I think Tennessee at least gets a game out of the first round because I think they are still better than Louisiana, and I think they'll stifle them defensively.
Yeah, and I'm on the bandwagon Louisiana here, and I'll be quick. Just Tennessee is very offensively challenged. Just 195th in the nation in effective field goal percentage. They turn the ball over a ton. I don't like Tennessee without Zakai Ziegler.
I know. I know. I
Uh,
know. I know.
Straight up Louisiana.
Ugh, all right. I get it. I'm with you. I think it's fair. I think the entire world is picking Louisiana, and like if it was any other Sun Belt team, like I probably don't pick Tennessee here. So that's nothing against Louisiana. So Kentucky and Providence, you have a 6 and an 11. You have a revenge game from Hopkins playing against his former team, and like Josh said yesterday on the Spaces, that doesn't normally work out, right? When do revenge games ever matter? Well, I don't think it matters here either. I think Providence is playing their worst basketball this season. They were an unbelievable team for most of the year, and then the brakes fell off the track, or the trains fell off the track. But I think Kentucky just is that grinded out, fun 6-seed team this year. Expectations were all over the place. Out of the tournament, firing Cal, and yada, yada, yada. And here they are as a blue blood, as a 6-seed playing against Providence. Ultimately, I think there's some implications of this game outside of that, but that's for another day. I think Kentucky wins.
Yeah, and another great point that Josh made about the revenge game is Hopkins being at Kentucky last year. Jacob Toppin got to guard him in practice all year. So he's able to lean a little bit on that experience as well. And then Providence doesn't really have anybody that can guard Oscar Tshiebwe. So I like Kentucky in this one. And honestly, I like them pretty big.
Yeah, same here. And it's honestly a game, if I accidentally miss it because of all the crazy festivities with the wedding this weekend, I probably won't be sad about it. All right, Kansas State, Montana State. This is no disrespect to Montana State, but I think they are not a 14 seed, so I think Kansas State wins this game big.
Agree with you. I think Kansas State, had they gotten matched up with somebody who is a little tougher in that 14 line, we mentioned Colgate already, could have potentially been up there. I might be considering an upset, but as things are, Kansas State moves on.
So, Michigan State, USC. I think a lot of people are picking USC, and I think that's some blind love to Pac-12 teams trying to make a run. I don't know what the reason would be for otherwise. I think they're a good team, but Michigan State's playing some of their best basketball here in the Big Ten tournament. Obviously, they did not get the tournament championship, but Coach Izzo has now made his 25th straight Final Four as the head coach, which I believe, if I remember correctly, is a NCAA record. I trust the coaching matchup here ultimately, and I think the Michigan State Spartans move on 7-10. If you didn't know, I went very chalk other than FAU, if you couldn't tell.
I'm right there with you. I'm just not crazy about USC, to be honest with you. I don't know that I would have even had them in a 10 line. I think they probably should have been more on like the 11, could have even arguably been in the play in. And just, the veteran experience that Michigan State has between Joey Hauser, Tyson Walker, I like Michigan State in this one.
Yeah, Arizona State in the Pac-12 tournament took care of USC pretty well, so I think Michigan State can do the same. Marquette, Vermont. Vermont, if I have heard correctly, won 7 straight American East regular season championship or regular season titles. So they're nothing short of a always experienced team in the tournament here. I feel like we're always going, oh, yep, there's Vermont again. That 15, that 14. I think they've pulled off the upset a couple of times, but it won't be this time against Shaka Smart. Marquette moves on.
Yeah, Marquette moves on easily. Vermont, another team we could argue about, maybe should have been on the 14 line ahead of Montana State. Art, absolutely, but I think that Marquette is just too much for a lot of teams, and definitely Vermont.
I believe we agreed on every single thing in this bracket except for Louisiana over Tennessee. So let's just keep going here. Purdue and your golden child FAU.
I think this matchup is kind of oddly bad for both teams.
Yeah,
I think
there it is.
FAU could give Purdue a lot of problems with the way they pressure the ball, and again, their depth, but they don't have much size at all. They might be able to crowd Edie if they're able to, get like a triple team on him and force him to pass. We've seen him struggle in some of those situations, but I think Purdue pulls off a tough victory, maybe for the first half, but they pull away in the second half and win by 10, 12 points.
It'll remind me of the Penn State game that we just saw on Sunday. Like it'll look just like that. They'll do the triple team thing, and Penn State was trying to swarm him and all that stuff, and it doesn't ultimately work. Edie knows what he's doing when he has the ball like that triple team. He knows exactly where to look. Passing vision's really good. So yeah, I think Purdue gets the victory there. Duke and Tennessee. You have Duke in Louisiana. I'm assuming this is another Blue Devil victory for you.
Yep, Duke moves on for a rematch with Purdue. And again, sort of for the same reason, I hate to just keep repeating myself, but when you have a ton of size like Duke does, not only with Lively, but then they go to the bench with Ryan Young, Kyle Filipowski, that's going to be a huge problem for Louisiana.
Yeah, I think Duke's playing some of the best defensive basketball in the country right now, and I think that's important, especially in this game. If it's Tennessee like I have here, it'll be an ugly 61-52 game, and I won't want to watch that. Kentucky and Kansas State. Who do you have here?
I have Kentucky moving on here. I think, again, I mentioned it last night. Kentucky, top 5 team in the country coming into the year, probably still a top 10 team talent wise in the country. Do they have Severe Wheeler back?
I don't know. That's a great question.
Because I think that makes a little bit of a difference for how I see this. Because if he's coming off the bench with that guard play, I definitely like them more. But I like them to beat Kansas State either way.
Yeah, I'm just trying to look up KenPom here to see where both of these teams ended up, and I don't see them in the top 40, which is fun. Why don't I see them? Yes, I do. Where am I looking at here? Am I blind? Yeah, Kentucky's 28th in KenPom, so obviously that takes into consideration a lot of some of the stuff they struggled with earlier in the year. Who was the other team we just talked about? Kansas State. Where
Kansas State.
Why am I not? Am I blind?
I think they're somewhere in the 30s.
Oh, 24th. Yeah, they're literally 4 spots apart in KenPom. So comparatively, I like to look at that, especially in the round of 32 and Sweet 16. I like to look at how far apart two teams are and that adjusted efficiency margin, just to get an understanding of if there's a discrepancy or a gap there, maybe something I'm missing. I'm not going to think twice about it. I think Kansas State is a very underrated team for how tough they were in the Big 12 this year, and I have Kansas State moving on.
Watch out in this one for Kentucky. Kentucky is one of the best offensive rebounding teams, so that could also be another advantage.
All right. Michigan State Marquette. I have the Golden Eagles moving on. I think Shaka Smart, I don't think he's going to outcoach Izzo, but I think he's got the better team.
Yeah, Shaka's just got more talent. Tyler Kolek, with Big East Player of the Year, I believe, just phenomenal point guard, and I think Marquette wins.
I love how we're just making work of this Eastern bracket. So I think we've made it all the way to the Sweet 16. We have Purdue and Duke, and you have Kentucky and Marquette, and I have Kansas State Marquette. We'll still go back to the top. Purdue and Duke, who do you think moves on?
I think Duke takes this one. I mentioned it's a rematch from earlier in the year, and I think that's advantageous to Duke a little bit because they've had a chance to see Edie. They'll have a better game plan for him this time around. And Jeremy Roach over the past month of the year, well, 2 months, I'll say, has been, an unbelievable threat for them offensively. So if he's able to continue being aggressive for them, go-to guy down the stretch, I think Duke is able to pull away down the stretch with their guard play and win by like 6 or 8.
Yeah, I think the size is the difference maker. When you have so many bodies you can throw at a guy like Edie, and I think the guards just have to make shots consistently. I think Derrick's starting to figure out the form looked really good in the ICC tournament. Proctor obviously has not been a stout three-point shooting threat this year, but I think he can be, and I think they just don't need it to be. But I think this three-point shooting teams are going to be able to beat Purdue. It's just a matter of how many they're going to have to make down the stretch because Purdue's guards, I'm not going to say a word about them being freshmen and inexperienced, but Roach, I think, has the upper hand there. So I do think Duke moves on as well, and I think that's the pretty pick for everybody in that side of the bracket. Watch Purdue just go on a ridiculous run now after we've all hated on them for years, and they finally figure it out. And then the other side, I have Kansas State and Marquette, and you have Kentucky and Marquette. Who moves on for you?
I like the Golden Eagles. The offense is just too much ultimately for Kentucky. I think that's where Kentucky at times finds themselves struggling, not to the extent of a team like Tennessee, but they can't necessarily keep up with the higher scoring teams. And I think Marquette's able to put up 80 plus on them.
This is where I would disagree. I am going to have Kansas State. They are my darling team in this side of the bracket. They are one of the best three-point defensive teams in the country. They're 16th in three-point percentage defense. I do think they're going to defend the three really well. They'll be able to stifle some of Marquette's offense, who, by the way, doesn't rely on the three, but they are at least that will be a huge difference maker for me, and I do think Kansas State's got some of the best I think just some of the best talent on the floor right now, ultimately, and I think that's going to matter against Marquette, who I mentioned it with Josh last week on your show, but I think their depth scares me a little bit with Marquette. They only went in a few deep on the Big East tournament, and those guys struggled pretty mightily. Cross and some others there, so I think Kansas State gets the win. So I have a Duke-Kansas State Elite Eight, and you have a Duke-Marquette Elite Eight. Does Duke make its Final Four first year under Coach Shire? Do they complete the trifecta of what trifecta? Do they complete the pair of ACC championship and Final Four berth?
I think they do. I think it's been kind of an advantage for Duke flying under the radar a little bit throughout the season. You mentioned it earlier, but over the past 2 months, they've been, if not the best defensive team in the country, probably one of the 5 best defensive teams in the country. They haven't given up 70 points since that matchup we talked about earlier with Miami. And I think the defense ultimately is what they can lean on to get them to the Final Four.
I, unfortunately, for the sake of this fun, I do have Kansas State making the Final Four. I think they're underseeded. I think they're underappreciated. I think Noel and Johnson are going to have unbelievable offensive stretches here, and I think that I think their guard play will be able to beat Duke, and I think that'll be a big difference maker. They also had a really tough schedule. Sometimes for me, the Big 12, I think people all year were just riding the Big 12 as the best conference ever, which it had a argument, but I think that matters less then than it does now when you look at battle-tested teams in a conference like the Big 12. Not that the ACC wasn't hard. Duke obviously won the ACC. They played Miami and a couple others there. But Kansas State had a very, very tough season where they were supposed to finish last, and they ended up finishing top couple in their conference. So I think that's a difference maker. I think they're battle-tested, and I think that will be where Duke ends its Final Four run. Kansas State makes the Final Four for me. All right, we're going to try our best to get through the West, even though this is a very tantalizing region, and you're going to have to stick around to see who we think wins the Final Four and the championship game. So, Kansas and Howard right up front here. Howard is a really fun Sweet 16, or I keep saying Sweet 16 every time I look at the number 16. I did it earlier, too, with Northern Kentucky. This is who I actually think is going to scare a number 1 seed, and if there's anybody they can scare, it's probably not Kansas, unfortunately. If Purdue drew Howard, I think that would be really interesting. Coach Cal made some comments against Howard. He was really worried about them, and he said they're a second or third weekend team, barring if they're not a 16 seed. This was, November. So Coach Cal obviously is a very intelligent basketball mind, and Howard is a very good team here. They got to play them. I think Kansas is going to have to fight against Howard.
Yeah, I don't have many thoughts on this one. I think Kansas handles them fairly easily, but I think Kansas is, I think they're the second best team in the country. So behind Alabama right now.
As do I. All right, Arkansas, Illinois. So I know this one is hard for you, like it was for me with NC State and Creighton. But Arky gets in despite injuries all year, good coaching despite those stretches. They lost Brazil. And then Illinois, if you opened up a dictionary and you looked up the word inconsistent would show Illinois as a synonym. So that was just for you. I wanted to throw that in there. But who do you have?
Well, I feel like, and you know how this is for sure, that like as a fan, you're able to talk yourself into seeing the absolute best version of your team. And I truly believe that if you see the best version of this Illinois team, they can beat anybody. I can't pick them in this game, though. Like, I can't rightfully pick them in this game. Arkansas is going to have probably the 2 best players on the floor between Nick Smith and Ricky Council. You could argue Anthony Black maybe in that conversation as well. They have Mitchell down low. I just think overall they have so many threats. If they had Trayvon Brazile, they would be a top 5 seed national title contender. Without him, I still think they get past Illinois here.
So do I, and I apologize. Arkansas is really good, and I think 8's kind of disrespectful, but for the year they had, they ended up at 8 pretty deservingly. So, and I know people are going to, we'll talk about it in a minute. I know people are going to be like, an Arkansas can give Kansas a problem. We'll get to that in just a moment. St. Mary's VCU 5-12. I have St. Mary's. The Gales moving on. I do think VCU is really tough. Obviously, I think the A-10 was pretty weak this year, but they also had a pretty good record throughout it. So I don't think this is the VCU team. Everyone's going to see the name and everybody's going to fall in love with it as a 12-5. St. Mary's defense is really good. I know what they've done against Gonzaga down the stretch here, and they haven't looked like a very potent offensive team. That scares me, but not in the first round, so St. Mary's beats VCU.
Yeah, I'm with you. You mentioned how potent of a defensive team they are, and they have at times struggled offensively, but they have two different dudes in that backcourt who can go off with Logan Johnson and Aiden Mahaney. So I like them getting out of the first round at least.
That St. Mary's, that is?
St. Mary's, yeah,
That's
excuse me.
Okay, that's what I thought. I was like, I didn't recognize either as two his players as VCU players. That's why I was like, wait a minute, 12-5? Uh-oh. By the way, to recap the 8-9 we talked about earlier, FAU is my only 9 seed for those keeping count at home. So, yes, I know that the statistics play against me there, and I don't care. Sometimes the teams have to matter more than the stats. Analytic people just had a heart attack. UConn, Iona. So, this is the Rick Pitino Bowl because he's obviously potentially going back to the Big East. Oh, man, this one is so hard. Can you go first, please, for my sanity?
Yeah, absolutely, because I did not have as much trouble with this one at all. I think UConn handles them pretty easily. Sonogo and Donovan Clingan down low. Not very many teams can match up with them. Andre Jackson's been great on the outside. Jordan Hawkins, obviously a phenomenal shooter. My concern for UConn is more once we get later in the tournament, which we'll talk about, because I think Andre Jackson's just so hot and cold.
Okay, I think that's fair. Yeah, Iona's guards are really good. They don't have a big man presence that I think scares UConn enough, and I think UConn's I think sometimes talent has to win. Now, I think if you're looking at some of these other 12 or 13s that could have been in the Iona spot there, then maybe we're having a different conversation. But I also think Iona is probably, people were saying they should have been a 12, and I think 13 is probably fair, and this is just a bad draw. Nothing wrong. Ricky Pitino wanted to get into the NCAA tournament, and he did. And especially after how it went last year for Iona, now he's probably going to figure out how to get St. John's there. So that's another conversation for another day. I think UConn moves on. I was drawing that up a little bit. Like I was drumming that one up. Don't get me wrong. I do think UConn ultimately, I think they probably beat them pretty bad. So TCU and then the winner of Arizona State and Nevada, two teams that were kind of in that bubble range for a lot of the last month here. And they ultimately both got in and then they ended up having to be in the play-in. So does it matter either way, Arizona State, Nevada? And then do you have TCU moving on?
It does not matter either way for me. I have TCU moving on. We talked about it last night. Mike Miles is just a difference maker. And I think that TCU handles this matchup pretty easily as well. I think this region is pretty easy in the first round. And then once you get into the second round, you have some really difficult matchups to pick.
Yeah, I agree. I think TCU gets it done. I know Lampkin's not going to be there. He stepped away from the team. That's going to be a big man that they're going to need later on, especially in the next round. We'll talk about in just a second, but I think TCU gets the victory. Gonzaga, Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon, like someone mentioned last night on the Spaces, is without their best player, tore his Achilles. I believe his name is Blackshear. Last name Blackshear. He tore his Achilles in November, December. I had them circled preseason as like could be a really fun team depending on their seeding draw, and then they obviously went, their best player went down. They still won their conference tournament. They probably have a fully healthy team. They're probably a scary team to pick here, but not against Gonzaga. Gonzaga moves on.
Totally agree. Bryce Drew coaches a very exciting brand of basketball, but Gonzaga's just way too much.
Northwestern Boise State. Northwestern Boise State. This one's going to be really interesting because Northwestern was projected to finish, I believe, second to last in the Big Ten. And they ended up going into the Big Ten tournament as a 2 seed. So quite the 180 for this team. But I do think Boise State is playing some of their best brand of basketball, and that style I think is going to be too much for Audige and Bowie.
Yeah, I agree. You literally took the words out of my mouth there. I just think that they rely so much, Northwestern that is, relies so much on Boo Buie, and Boise State's such a good defensive team that you have to be able to share the ball a little bit more, and Northwestern's very one-man reliant.
We do have to give credit to Northwestern, though, because they do hold their opponents to 62.5 points a game, which is less than Boise State. They're also 4-1 against top 25. I'm literally just reading the ESPN tournament challenge information that's really neat that I do look at. I do think it's interesting. But Boise State's the better offense right now. And I want to find the clip. I wasn't able to put it on YouTube a couple months ago. I had the guys from Jimmer Range on. One of them's a Maryland fan. One of them's a Northwestern fan. One of them goes to Northwestern and covers the team for NU Sports. But I asked them, I said, we were doing 21 questions, and I said, hey, elevator pitch me why Maryland or Northwestern can win the Big Ten tournament, or win the Big Ten this year. And it was like it was like a joke. It was like a haha, like here's a hilarious reason, like, the sky would have to fall out, whatever. And look at the season both of them had. Honestly, really proud of both of them. I'll have to find the clips and put them back up on like TikTok and YouTube. But Northwestern is a team that I think if, talking about good guards win in March, they get past Boise State, they're going to at least give teams a fight in the next round. But I do think Boise State wins. All right. Here is why I wanted to talk about luck. The luckiest team in the United States of America in college basketball is the UNC Asheville Bulldogs. You mentioned close games. It's not sometimes always a luck stat. Sometimes it's a skilled stat winning close games. I watched them hit a buzzer beater against Gardner-Webb from 44 feet. So this team, yes, they can win close games. They can make unbelievable shots with Drew Pember and getting to the free throw line, which I think is a very important stat in the NCAA tournament. And I would be far-fetched to sit here and tell you that I did not sit here last night and think about it for over an hour that they can beat UCLA. And then I snapped back into reality and realized, regardless of Jalen Clark, if Jalen Clark's there, they lock down Drew Pember, no problem. However, Bona didn't play in the Arizona game either. So no Bona, potentially. No Jalen Clark. Bona will probably come back, I hope. But this UCLA team is beaten and battered. And honestly, I changed it back to UCLA 30 minutes ago before we started recording. So I'm going to go with UCLA, but I don't care about the 18.5-point underdog that UNC Asheville is. That's Vegas just not paying attention to UNC Asheville basketball, even though they should. And don't be surprised if this is the 15 that beats it 2 this year.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you said. Like you said, I think if Jalen Clark is there, UCLA probably has a much bigger advantage in this game. Hammer UNC Asheville in the points, though, as far as I'm concerned. That's an absolute. Pember, at the very least, goes for 25 and 10 in this game. Even if Bona plays, to be honest with you, like Bona is one of those guys, to me, just studying him for our draft stuff. He has a lot of those kind of like highlight reel defensive plays. But as far as just being a straight up post defender, I've watched him get abused a few times this year. Like he doesn't impress me. I think Pember could have his way with him. So I still have UCLA probably by, close to 10, but that 18.5 spread is way too big for me to feel comfortable giving those points.
Yeah, honestly, I thought about changing it right back to UNC Asheville as we were talking about it because I'm like, my God, I believe in this. And I'll be honest with you, I might make a completely separate bracket from this one and submit it to some other like non-pools that I believe in or that I'm trying to win money in. And I will probably switch the Asheville pick and see if it performs comparatively and see if that bracket is the same minus that pick. So I don't want to lose ultimately thinking that UCLA is probably the better team, obviously. All right, let's keep rolling. Kansas and Arkansas back to the top. So everyone, like I said, was picking Arky as like a fun, could beat Kansas, best guards, whatever. I think Kansas is ridiculously talented. I think Jalen Wilson's one of the best players in the country. Grady Dick's obviously an unbelievable shooter for them. I do think that they're going to be able to beat Arkansas. But tough draw, though. I have to put that.
I agree. No, this is a tough draw talent-wise. I think this is a close game for probably 35 minutes, and then where we see Kansas pull away at the end is just Arkansas's lack of discipline. Arkansas finds themselves in foul trouble a lot of times late in games. They take a lot of stupid floor fouls. I think Kansas gets them in the bonus late in that game and just kills them from the free throw line.
Yeah, I know that and I'm not necessarily crapping on coaching or anything here either, but I think this is a tough draw. Like, I think Musselman's good, but I think Bill Self is worlds better than anybody in the country right now in terms of coaching a basketball team to a national title. So I think Kansas gets the victory. So St. Mary's we both had, and then UConn we both had, and we didn't really think about it. So does UConn struggle against St. Mary's? I think, is that what you were alluding to, or is it just a pretty easy answer? UConn is still better.
I still think UConn kind of just rolls their way into the Sweet 16 against Kansas here. I think this is a pretty good matchup for UConn. Their guards should be able to keep St. Mary's guards in check for the most part. And then you mentioned that St. Mary's kind of struggles offensively outside of Logan Johnson and Mahaney. So I think UConn's able to hold them defensively and then probably win this one by 15 points.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with anything. I think UConn moves on also. We both had TCU and Gonzaga. Is this the Gonzaga year because they're not a 1 seed? Is this fun? Is this the team they're going to beat? And we're all going to be wondering if they're going to make the Elite Eight again.
I think so. I think they at least make the Sweet 16. They're so good offensively. The concerns defensively are definitely going to come into play in that Sweet 16 matchup against, I don't want to ruin it yet, but I like Gonzaga in this one. TCU, just a little bit too much of a one-trick pony. So Gonzaga moves on.
All right, and I'm trying to pull up my UCLA stats here for a second. So UCLA is a really good team. By the way, to answer your question, yeah, I have Gonzaga moving on. I don't want to comment any further because I think that they're better than TCU, regardless of any injury of any player on either side. Boise State, UCLA is who I had. I believe you ended up agreeing with me on Boise State, Northwestern there. So if this is Asheville, then Boise State probably stifles them pretty handedly. But if UCLA couldn't do it, then Boise State couldn't either. So this could be the UNC Asheville path if they are playing Northwestern or Boise State. I could see any result there being not surprising. I have Boise State and UCLA. And I think for just the sole fact of okay, never mind. Go first. I can't decide right now.
Tiger Campbell's the difference in this game for me. Having not only a great point guard, but a veteran point guard is huge in March, and I pick UCLA for that reason.
So they're almost identical in 3-point percentage defense. They're literally like 34 and 31. They both hold their teams to 31% from the 3-point line. So it's like, and UCLA already doesn't shoot the three very efficiently anyway. Boise State's a really good rebounding team. Really good effective field goal percentage defense team. I have Boise State down, and I'm going to pick them. I think the injuries become too much, and I think if they can shoot their way through this game and have not have an off night necessarily, I think Boise State can beat UCLA. I don't feel good about it though. God,
UCLA is that your first double-digit seed going to the Sweet 16? No, you had Furman.
I had Furman, and I had Drake, and I had Kent State.
Oh man.
Yeah. Well, no, I had Drake against Houston.
Yeah.
That is not my first, unfortunately. So, all right. So at the top, Kansas, UConn. This is the one, no joke, that I would have went to bed at 12:30 instead of 2:30 if I legitimately sat still for a solid hour, looked at everything I could, and I ultimately landed on Kansas. I know it's really hard to repeat as national champions, but I think if they can get past UConn, then I think that they can probably win the national title because of just the momentum they'll have at that point, playing one of the best teams in the country that's a 4 seed. Obviously, I understand that Gonzaga is probably the team they play next, but I think Kansas can beat UConn. I think talent ultimately is going to be a battle here, and I do think Kansas. I like how Harris is playing down the stretch, and I mentioned a lot of the stuff with Grady Dick and Jalen Wilson. So stylistically, they're a little different, which is where I struggled, but I think Kansas can get it done.
I think Kansas can get it done, but I think this is the kind of exact matchup that I would not favor for Kansas. If Kansas has one weakness, it is their front court. Ernest Uday has played a little bit better here as of late, but he's still a young guy that's coming along. KJ Adams is a little bit undersized. Zach Clements hasn't really been a factor all year like they hoped he would be. So I think Kansas, barring this matchup, probably has an easy run to at least the Elite Eight, maybe the Final Four. But running into UConn here is just bad luck for them, and I pick the Huskies.
I like it. At the bottom, Gonzaga, Boise State for me, and I believe you had Gonzaga, UCLA. Yes?
Yes, sir. And I like the Zags here to get past UCLA. If UCLA had Jalen Clark, that defensive impact makes the difference here. But I think without him, this could be a very high scoring affair. And Gonzaga might be the best offensive team in the country. If not, definitely top 5. Drew Timme, I mentioned it with the Adam Bona and Drew Pember matchup. I think Drew Timme, to an even further extent, would just abuse Bona in the paint. And Gonzaga moves on.
Yeah, and I have a feeling I know where you're going with this, so I'm going to very quickly say I think Gonzaga moves on against Boise State also. It is what it is. We're in the Elite Eight. The best teams are going to win some of those games there, barring a St. Peter's run from somebody. Kansas and Gonzaga, who ends up in Houston for you in the Final Four?
Well, I had UConn beating
Oh,
Kansas.
yeah, sorry. Well,
So
okay, so out of those cluster of teams that we all
yeah, yeah.
are somewhere in the same range.
I'm going UConn here. I
I
think
knew
this
it.
is a
I knew it.
this is maybe the matchup of the tournament for me. Just Timmy matching up against Sonogo and Donovan Clingan. He tends to kind of fade against physical play. I think that's maybe a little more overblown than it is true. I mean, it's definitely statistically true, but I think Timmy has proven in the tournament that he steps up. But I still like UConn to pull this off. I think overall their depth gets it done.
I could see a world where it's the opposite. If Gonzaga is playing Kansas, then Gonzaga makes the Final Four because Kansas is front court. I'm with you there. I could see that kind of being the flipped answer. I had a different, result here. I had Kansas and Gonzaga. So I think if Kansas draws Gonzaga, I think ultimately talent does win out, and I do think Kansas is the most talented team in the country, and they'll be battle tested at that point. They're really good in those quad games this year, quad one games. I think they beat Gonzaga, but I think it's a really tough fought game, and I think Timmy tries to go out with a fight. So, not literally, but figuratively. So,
And for the record, I agree with you there. If Kansas were to get past UConn in that Sweet 16, I think that's the toughest matchup for Kansas. So I think Kansas would handle Gonzaga fairly easily.
okay. So recap your Final Four, and then let's roll right into it and pick the Final Four and the national championship and get out of here because we've been here for a while.
So I have Arizona and Duke on one side, and then I have Texas and UConn on the other. And I like an Arizona UConn final, one of the best front court matchups we'll have seen in the finals in a long, long time. And I think before we started this, I was going to pick UConn to win. And now I'm thinking Arizona. The more I think about it, I've just been in love with this Arizona team all year long. I think the guard play starts to resemble the guard play we've seen back in Maui. And Arizona looks unstoppable for this 5-6 game stretch and wins.
So here's where I have a problem with my bracket and your bracket in general is I have Arizona on the other side. I also have them playing Kansas State. So looking at this tournament, I knew that I was going to love Arizona. I knew I was going to have them farther than most people probably, but then you ended up in the Final Four with me and the national championship with me. I do have Arizona playing. I do have them beating Kansas State. I think Duke, though, as crazy as this sounds, their front courts are very comparable. And I think it'd be really fun. And I think it would come down to Duke's guards actually being better than Arizona's guards right now, especially the way they're shooting. So I think it'd be really crazy to think that Duke could make the national championship if they make the Final Four against Arizona. So I'm going to begrudgingly pick Arizona because Duke's not playing them, and I know I picked Kansas State over Duke. That's my own fault. So I have Arizona on that side. Did you you hadn't made the Kansas pick, right, on the other side, or you haven't made the other Final Four pick yet, have you?
Yeah, no, I picked UConn over Texas.
That's right, you did. Okay, so I'll go ahead and roll it out then. So roll out the red carpet. I think I have the toughest. This will be the toughest choice. You know how they do the you can do another bracket as it goes down, and as you lose, you can like play another bracket. I don't do it, but if you get to this Texas Kansas game, this is gonna be the hardest game to pick, and this is where I'm gonna really go against some of the data here. Texas is 2-1 against Kansas this year, unfortunately, but they've dealt with a lot of things. I know that last one they didn't have Coach Self. Here's my problem: Texas is unbelievable in the front court. Or in the back court, and I think that's what wins games in March. But I also think that nothing against Rodney Terry, but Bill Self has another team with talent playing like a national championship contender, and if they make the Final Four, I see no reason why they can't beat Texas. It's obviously tough when you play a team 3 times already. This will be a 4th time. I think they'll end up splitting the season series, and I think Kansas will make the national championship against Arizona.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you before you ended up detailing on it, but that Texas win by like 20 points in the Big 12 championship game doesn't scare you off a little bit of that pick?
I think not having Coach Self is worth 10 points alone. So it was a 10-point loss in my eyes, which is, I know not rationally sound, but that's not.
I think that's totally fair. I mean, not only not having Self on the sideline, but just also, I'm sure there was some sort of emotional tax kind of with him being in the hospital and just dealing with all of that stuff. So, no, I think that's a totally fair point.
I do think Texas is playing like the better team, though. That's what scares me. But I think you have 4 rounds to figure it out, and I think Kansas ultimately is a momentum team. We've seen throughout the year, even in the wild, wild west, Big 12, whatever you want to call it, in the wild, wild west out there, even in those stretches when they are winning multiple games in a row, they look like the best team in the country and they look unbeatable, and I know they can get back to that. So, national champion, we actually ended up having the exact same thing. Wow, oh my gosh, Arizona and Kansas. Wait a minute. You had UConn. God, this is why I don't like doing these sometimes, because it's like I have to look at my own and remember where you have it. So you have Arizona and UConn. You haven't said your national championship yet, right? Or your pick?
I did say I pick Arizona, but
Okay.
I just think that this is going to be an unbelievable matchup. I had UConn before sitting down here and talking to you. They were my national champion last night when I filled it out.
Okay.
And then just the more I think about it, like I said, I've been in love with this Arizona team all year, and I can't go against them now.
All right. Well, begrudgingly, because of all the things I said about Kansas all year, and I think Arizona's guards, I think this is a fun matchup where I think a lot of front court teams have made the Final Four. I think that could be what is the difference maker for Texas, being a national title contender, favorite, whatever you want to call it. But I do think ultimately if it's Kansas-Arizona, I think Kansas is going to get it done. I think they're the more talented team. Arizona's front court is really, really tough. I do have it as a 72-64 game as like the tiebreaker, pick the final score for the sweepstakes. I think Kansas repeats as the national champion. I've been talking about it all year as I picked Houston for a long time, and then before that was picking Kansas, and now I'm back on the Kansas train because of the way I think they're going to be talented and the way I think it's a very similar way they won last year, right? Stylistically, very, very strong wing presence that plays on exceptional defense. They know how to shoot the ball really well when they need to. I think Harris is one of the best guards in the country. So I'm going to go with Kansas. 72-64. I think Kansas wins the national championship. That felt really good to get off my chest.
72-64, so they're able to keep Arizona in check there a little bit, huh?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if it was 84-78 either.
Honestly, I think that would be the path to victory for Kansas, though. I think if you get into like an 84-73 type of game, that probably favors Arizona. But if they're able to contain them defensively, yeah, I think I totally agree.
All right. Well, this was a lot of fun. No idea what the final run time ended up being, but first of all, thank you for spending all this time with me. At the top, like always, at the end, please plug away. Let people know where they can find you, watch you, listen to you, etc. What you guys have got going on with ECB this week as well.
Yeah, you can find me co-hosting Everything College Basketball Podcast. Like I said, find us over on Twitter at ECB Podcast 10. Can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, all that good stuff. We'll be having a bracket special that we're recording Monday night, and that'll be coming out probably Tuesday morning. And then you can find my work at House of College Hoops, and also find me on Twitter at Phil_Dex_sports.
I love it. Thank you. Don't forget, if you're heading to any of these tournament games, for those near me in North Carolina, you've got your Greensboro matchups. You've got some of your ones on the East Coast as well. If you're anywhere in the country and you're thinking about going to any of these games, please go, because don't forget, you can get $20 off your first purchase at SeatGeek.com or in the SeatGeek app. Click the link in the top of the description below to get $20 off that NCAA tournament ticket. I have seen some of them for as low as $38. Think about it. $18 ticket. Crazy. This is the best basketball in the country at the best time of the year. I'm not going to go on any longer because at this point this pod's going to be 2 hours anyway. This has been the Two Pointers Podcast. I'm Trevor Everett. Enjoy the tournament.